My name is Helen Carter, and I am 66 years old. What I'm about to tell you changed my life forever. The day of my husband Robert's funeral was the quietest day I have ever known. The air was heavy. The sky, a colorless gray. And every sound, birds, footsteps, whispered, condolences seemed muffled, as if the world itself held its breath. I stood beside his grave, clutching my handkerchief, when my phone vibrated in my purse. I almost didn't look, but something made me pull it out. It was a message from an unknown number. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My fingers went numb. I stared at the screen, reread the words, and felt the ground sway beneath me. I typed with trembling hands, "Who are you?" The reply came almost instantly. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." My throat closed. I lifted my head toward Andrew and Thomas, standing a few feet away beside the casket. Their expressions strangely calm. Their tears looked rehearsed. Their hugs cold. Something inside me whispered that what I had just read, impossible as it seemed, might be true. For 42 years, Robert had been my partner, my shelter, my reason to keep breathing. I met him when I was 24 in the quiet little town of Willow Falls, Missouri. We had grown up on the same dusty back roads, chasing the same small dreams. I worked as a cleaner to care for my sick mother. Robert repaired bicycles in the tiny shop his father left him. We were poor, but we were rich in what mattered most: love, trust, and laughter. I remember the first time he spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning. The sun had just burned through the mist. I was walking to the market in my faded green dress and scuffed shoes when he stepped out of his shop. Grease on his hands, shy smile on his lips. "Good morning, Helen," he said gently. "Need me to check your bike? I didn't even own a bike." But I invented a reason just to talk to him. That small conversation turned into evenings beneath the old oak in Town Square Park, into promises whispered over lemonade, and eventually into a simple wedding filled with hope and laughter. Our early years were hard. The roof of our two-bedroom house was tin, and every rainstorm meant setting pots around the living room to catch leaks. Yet we were happy. Robert worked from sunrise to sunset at the shop, and I sewed dresses for women around town. We never had much, but we always had enough. When Andrew was born, my joy was so fierce it hurt. He had Robert's big hazel eyes and my smile. 2 years later came Thomas, just as perfect. I poured everything I had into them: my time, my strength, my dreams. Robert was a gentle father, patient, proud, endlessly kind. On Sundays he'd take the boys fishing by the river, teach them how to mend things with their hands, tell bedtime stories that left them giggling until they drifted off. For years, we were a close, simple family, or so I believed. But as the boys grew older, the warmth began to cool. Andrew, the eldest, was always questioning why we lived so modestly, why we didn't own a car like other families. Thomas followed him in everything, eager to please his big brother. When Andrew turned 18, Robert offered him a place at the shop. "You'll learn everything your grandfather taught me," he said proudly. But Andrew shook his head. "I don't want to get my hands dirty. Dad, I'm going to be someone important." Robert said nothing, yet I saw the hurt in his eyes. Many nights after that I found him on the porch, staring at the stars, his shoulders heavy with silence. His son hadn't only rejected his work, he had rejected his way of life. Years went by. Against every expectation, Andrew built a name in real estate, and Thomas soon followed him to the city. They began earning more money than Robert and I had ever seen. At first, I was proud. Our boys had escaped poverty. They were building something bigger than we had. But pride slowly turned into a kind of mourning. Their visits grew short and infrequent. Their calls rushed. When they did come, they arrived in shiny cars, wearing pressed suits, smelling of cologne and distance. They talked about investments, clients, and property values. They looked at us with polite pity. "Mom," Andrew said during one visit, "you and Dad should move somewhere better. This place is falling apart." He was right. In a way, the house leaned and sighed with age, but it held our memories, the smell of bread, baking, the echoes of their laughter, the creak of the floor where Robert had first danced with me. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. Robert only smiled and said, "Helen, money has changed our boys. We aren't enough for them anymore." I tried not to believe it. "They're just busy," I'd reply, forcing a smile. "They'll come around." But deep inside, I felt the truth settling in like cold weather. The distance deepened when Andrew married Clara Whitmore, a woman from the city who made no effort to hide her disdain for our simple life. The first time she visited, her heels sank into the dirt of our porch, her red dress shimmered like something from another world. "Nice to meet you," she said, extending only the tips of her fingers. Her eyes swept the house with faint disapproval. That evening, I cooked my best meatloaf, mashed potatoes, apple pie, but she barely touched her plate. Andrew kept whispering to her, "Next time we'll take them to a restaurant," thinking I couldn't hear. But I did, and each word felt like a blade. Thomas stayed single but adopted the same detachment. His visits were limited to holidays, and even then he seemed in a hurry to leave. He spent most of his time on the phone, pacing and muttering about deals. "Mom, I've got to go. Big meeting tomorrow," he'd say, hugging me absently. Family Sundays faded into memory. Christmas turned formal and brief. They brought us expensive gifts we didn't need: a coffee maker, a watch, a silk scarf, and left after 2 hours with visible relief. Robert and I aged quietly together, comforted only by each other's company. His hands had grown shaky, my eyes weaker. But we never asked for help. We still had our dignity, and that was enough. One evening, as we sipped coffee on the porch, Robert sighed. "You know what's saddest? Helen, it's not that they have money, it's that money made them forget we matter." He was right. Of course, they hadn't just changed their circumstances, they had changed their hearts. When Andrew bought a $200,000 house in St. Louis and Thomas followed with a $150,000 condo downtown, I knew the gap between us had become unbridgeable. During one visit, Clara looked around our modest kitchen and said, "You should sell this place and move into a retirement community. They have wonderful amenities for people your age." The word community stung like an insult. After 40 years of love and labor, after raising 2 sons, they wanted to send us away to die among strangers. "We don't need a home," Robert replied, voice calm but firm. "We're fine here." But I saw the exchange of glances between our sons. They agreed with her. Not long after, Andrew arrived carrying papers. "Dad." "Mom," he began, flashing his practiced business smile. "This house isn't worth much, maybe $1,000. If you sell, I can add some money so you can move somewhere better." But there was no better place than this. For Andrew, everything was numbers and returns. "Besides," he continued, "Dad should retire. He's 70. It's time to rest." Robert looked at him with quiet sorrow. "Son, working isn't a burden. It's what keeps me alive." Thomas jumped in. "But you could get hurt. At your age, an accident could be serious." Their tone was gentle, but their eyes were impatient. In the months that followed, the pressure built. Realtors began appearing without warning, and strangers evaluated our property as if it already belonged to them. Andrew and Thomas spoke constantly of what would be best for everyone. One evening, Andrew announced, "Clara and I are planning to have kids. If you sell the house and move somewhere smaller, that money could be an early inheritance." An early inheritance? He was asking for his legacy while we were still alive. I could barely speak. Robert remained calm, though his jaw tightened. "Son," he said evenly, "when your mother and I die, everything we have will be yours. But while we're alive, the decisions are ours. Don't be stubborn." Thomas snapped, "You're old now. You can't keep living in the past." That night, Robert and I stayed up talking until dawn. For the first time, we said aloud what we'd both feared. Our sons were strangers. Something's wrong. Helen, he whispered. This isn't just ambition, it's something darker. He was right. I just didn't know how dark. 3 weeks before his death, Andrew came alone. He looked unusually serious. Sitting at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd eaten breakfast as a boy, he said, "Mom, no matter what happens, Thomas and I will always take care of you." At the time, his words warmed me. Remembering them now, beside Robert's grave, they send a chill down my spine. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning. Robert left early for the shop, as he always did. I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang sharply. "Mrs. Carter," a voice said, "I'm calling from Riverside Medical Center. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The world blurred. My knees buckled. "Is he alive? Is he conscious? Please?" "Ma'am, come as soon as possible." I couldn't drive. My neighbor Nancy Green had to take me because my hands were shaking so badly. Robert was careful, meticulous. How could this happen? When we reached the hospital, both Andrew and Thomas were already there. That startled me. No one had called them, at least not me. But grief fogged my thoughts. "Mom," Andrew said, hugging me tightly. "Dad's in bad shape. One of the machines exploded. He has burns and head trauma." Thomas's eyes were red, but there was something in his expression, nervousness, not sorrow. "Can we see him?" I asked. "Only one visitor at a time. 5 minutes max," the nurse explained. When I entered the ICU, my breath caught. Robert lay under a web of tubes and bandages. I took his uninjured hand. "Robert, my love, I'm here. You'll get through this." For a moment, I felt the faintest squeeze. His eyelids fluttered. He was fighting. For a fleeting moment, Robert's hand tightened around mine, so weak that I might have imagined it. But I knew what I felt. His eyelids quivered beneath the bandages. A faint sign of life. "You're still here," I whispered. "Please don't leave me." The nurse touched my shoulder gently. "Ma'am, 5 minutes." Those minutes vanished in a heartbeat. I walked out trembling, my throat raw from holding back tears. In the waiting room, Andrew and Thomas were speaking in hushed tones to a doctor I hadn't seen before, their posture alert. Businesslike felt wrong in a corridor of grief. The next 3 days blurred into one endless vigil. I slept in a hard chair by the vending machines, refusing to go home. The smell of disinfectant clung to my clothes. My prayers ran together in whispers. My sons took turns staying with me, but they seemed more interested in meetings with the medical staff than in holding their father's hand. I caught fragments of their conversations. "Is the life insurance policy active?" Andrew asked, one doctor. Thomas murmured something about workers' compensation. Their words slid through the air like cold coins. On the second day, Andrew sat beside me. "Mom, I reviewed Dad's insurance paperwork," he began carefully. "He has a life policy, $50,000, and there's a workers' comp clause that could bring in 75 more if the accident qualifies." I stared at him in disbelief. "Why are you talking about money? Your father is fighting for his life. I just want to make sure you're taken care of," he said, eyes too steady, too rehearsed. I turned away and pressed my hands together until my knuckles went white. All I wanted was my husband breathing beside me again. By the third morning, the doctors looked exhausted. Machines hummed around Robert's bed like an orchestra of warning. When Dr. William Harper asked to meet privately, I already knew what he was going to say. Inside a small consultation room, he spoke softly. "Mrs. Carter, your husband's condition is extremely critical. The burns are infected and the head trauma is more extensive than we first thought. We have to be realistic about his chances." "What do you mean?" "Realistic?" I asked, though I already knew. "It means he's unlikely ever to regain consciousness. We can sustain him indefinitely, but his quality of life would be non-existent." The walls seemed to close in. "Do everything," I said through tears. "Whatever it costs. Whatever it takes, please. Save him." Andrew and Thomas exchanged a look that made my stomach twist. "Mom," Andrew said, voice gentle but firm, "we have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this." He always said he didn't want to be a burden. A burden, I cried. He's your father. He carried you on his back when you were little. He built your life with his hands. Thomas added, we're thinking of you too. Mom, the bills could drain your savings. Always money. Even here, surrounded by antiseptic light and the smell of death. They were counting dollars. That night, I stayed by Robert's bed long after visiting hours. The nurse on duty, young, kind-eyed, pretended not to notice. I held his hand and whispered, my love, they say there's no hope. But I can't let you go. You've always fought for us. Fight one more time. Then it happened again, a faint squeeze. Deliberate this time. His lips moved. No sound came out. But I leaned close enough to feel his breath stir against my cheek. What is it? Robert, tell me. His eyelids fluttered once, twice, and then stilled. The monitor stayed steady. When the nurse checked him, she said gently, sometimes there are involuntary movements. It doesn't mean he's conscious. But I knew better. He had tried to speak. He was trying to tell me something important. 2 days later, just before dawn on Friday, the alarms began. A shrill chorus of beeps filled the corridor. I woke on the waiting room bench, heart pounding, and ran barefoot down the hall. Nurses and orderlies rushed past me. No, please, I shouted. Robert. Through the doorway, I saw them working on him compressions. Injections. The rhythmic rise and fall of desperate hands. I stood frozen, whispering his name until my voice broke. After 40 minutes, Dr. Harper stepped away, shoulders heavy. I'm sorry, he said softly. Time of death, 4:37 a.m. The world fell silent. I remember the hum of the ceiling lights, the chill in my arms, the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I collapsed beside the bed, cradling his bandaged hand. It was still warm. Don't leave me, I whispered, rocking back and forth. Please. Not yet. Someone covered me with a blanket. Someone else touched my shoulder. Hours passed in pieces. When I finally lifted my head, sunlight streamed through the blinds, cruelly bright. An hour later, my sons arrived fresh-shaven, composed, almost prepared. Andrew carried a leather folder under his arm. Thomas held a stack of papers. Mom, Andrew said, putting an arm around me. We've already contacted Willow Falls Funeral Services. They can take care of everything this morning. Everything. As if death were a transaction. I could barely breathe. You arranged this already, Thomas nodded. We wanted to make things easier for you. I wanted to scream, to tell them how wrong that sounded. But no words came. I simply sat there, clutching my purse, staring at the hallway where they'd wheeled Robert's body away. The next hours were a blur of signatures and decisions I didn't remember making. The funeral director spoke kindly, but every question felt like an intrusion. Wood or metal casket, viewing or closed service, burial or cremation, I answered automatically. My mind detached, my heart a stone. Andrew handled the finances with brisk efficiency. Don't worry about the cost. Mom, he said, Dad's insurance will cover most of it. Insurance? Again that word. I wanted to shout that no amount of coverage could replace a man like Robert Carter. At home that evening, I wandered through the empty rooms, touching the worn furniture, the dented pots, the tools he'd left on the porch. His coffee mug still sat on the counter. A faint ring of grounds at the bottom. Everything smelled like him, engine oil and cedar soap. The doorbell rang. It was Nancy Green, my neighbor, holding a casserole dish and tears in her eyes. Helen, I'm so sorry, she said. If you need anything at all, just call. I thanked her, though my voice was barely a whisper. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked like an old ship in rough seas. Every time the wind rattled the windows, I thought I heard his voice. At one point, I sat up and looked at my phone on the nightstand. I don't even know why I turned it on habit. Maybe. Or some desperate hope. The screen lit up. And there it was, the same unknown number. My heart stopped. I opened the message. It was blank, just an empty bubble. as if whoever had written before wanted to remind me they still existed. I typed back before I could think. "Who are you, please? Tell me what's happening." No answer. Just silence. The next day, I dressed slowly for the funeral. Black dress. Black gloves. The pearls Robert had given me on our 10th anniversary. The church bells tolled as I walked into Willow Falls Funeral Chapel. Every step heavier than the last. The casket lay at the front, surrounded by flowers, white lilies. Robert's favorite. People offered condolences. Words that floated past without meaning. When the service began, I tried to focus on the hymns, the prayers, in the pastor's voice. But my thoughts kept circling back to that message. I'm alive. Don't trust our sons. I looked at Andrew and Thomas sitting together in the front row. They weren't grieving, they were performing. Their faces showed the right emotions at the right moments. But their eyes stayed dry. Every time they leaned close to whisper, a knot tightened in my stomach. After the burial, when everyone began to leave, I lingered by the grave. The chill of early evening had settled over the cemetery. The last shovel of dirt landed with a dull thud. I closed my eyes and whispered, "If you're out there, Robert, please give me a sign." My phone buzzed again. One message. Same number. 4 words. "I'm watching. Stay safe." The screen blurred through my tears. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped it. Behind me, Andrew's voice called, "Mom, you coming, we'll drive you home." I turned, forcing a smile. In a minute, they stood together. Silhouettes against the gray sky, my sons. My blood. And yet suddenly, I wasn't sure who they were. As they walked toward the car, I looked back at the grave, at the mound of earth that should have held my husband, and felt an icy certainty settle over me. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. "We've also contacted the insurance," Thomas added quietly. "The claim process is already underway." How could they be so efficient, so organized? So cold, barely an hour after losing their father, something was wrong. But my grief was a fog I couldn't see through. By afternoon, the funeral was set for Monday. Andrew handled everything without truly consulting me. He chose the simplest casket, the shortest service, as if the goal were to finish it fast and move on. "It's what Dad would have wanted," he said when I asked to be included. "Something simple, without a fuss." But Robert deserved more than this indecent hurry to bury him and forget. The day of the funeral came gray and raw, as if the sky itself were mourning. I wore my only black dress, the same one from my mother's funeral years ago, and my hands shook so badly, Nancy had to fasten the small buttons along the back. "Be strong, Helen," she whispered, gently combing my hair. "Robert would want to see you strong." I didn't feel strong. I felt emptied out. A shell walking through rooms that remembered him more vividly than I did in my shock. Every object in the house ached with his presence, his coffee mug on the table, his tools on the porch, his pillow still holding the faint, clean scent of his soap. At the cemetery, I was startled by how few people stood waiting. I had expected to see the men from the bike shop. More neighbors. More faces that knew us. But it was only Andrew, Thomas, Clara, Nancy, the pastor, and me. For a man who had lived 70 years in the same town and had helped so many, the funeral felt strangely empty. "Where are the guys from the shop?" I asked Andrew. We didn't want to bother anyone. He answered too quickly. Dad was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate. That wasn't true. Robert loved his community and they loved him in return. He would have wanted them there to say goodbye. Why had Andrew made everything so secretive? So rushed. During the service, I watched my sons with an eerie detachment. Andrew kept the proper solemn face but glanced at his watch again and again. Thomas fidgeted, restless, like a man late for a meeting. Clara, behind a slim black veil, checked her phone as if even grief had to respect her schedule. So this was how they said farewell to their father in patience. Distraction, and a performance of sadness. The pastor spoke of eternal life and rest and reunion with God. Beautiful words, but they rang hollow in my shattered chest. I didn't want Robert to rest in peace, I wanted him at home. Sitting on the porch with me, teasing me about burning the toast, stealing sips of my coffee, growing old by my side. When it came time to cast dirt on the casket, my knees buckled. Nancy had to hold me up as sobs tore through me. The sound of earth striking wood was cruel, final, hopeless. Right then, standing at my husband's grave, my phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." My heart stopped. Letters swam on the screen. For a second, I wondered if grief had finally broken me. With trembling hands, I typed, "Who are you?" The reply came at once. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone fell from my hands as if it burned. Nancy bent to pick it up, but I jerked forward and stopped her. "Not yet. Not until I understood what I was seeing." "You all right, Mom?" Andrew asked, coming closer with his practiced concern. I stared at his face, searching for something: guilt, pity, anything that would tell me what was true. His eyes were clear, perhaps sincere, but now every gesture looked staged. "I'm fine," I murmured, slipping the phone into my purse. "I just need to go home." On the drive back, the messages gnawed at me. Was someone playing a cruel joke at the worst moment of my life, or could there be the slightest chance Robert was alive? If he was, then who lay in that casket? And if he wasn't, who knew so much about our lives, especially our sons, to write such a message? That night, in a house that felt like a tomb, I replayed every moment of the last few days. The accident had been strange from the start. Andrew said a machine exploded at the shop, but Robert knew every screw and wire in that place. He was meticulous about maintenance, obsessive about safety. And how had my sons reached the hospital so quickly if no one had notified them? The hospital had called me first. I was the emergency contact. How did they know before I did? And then there was the money. From day one, Andrew and Thomas had talked about policies, coverage, beneficiaries, as though they had been waiting for this moment, rehearsing it. I went to Robert's desk. In the old metal box where he kept our important papers, I found the house deed, the shop documents, and the life insurance policy. Andrew had mentioned $50. Ling ling. But something snagged my memory. The coverage had been increased just 6 months earlier from $5,000 to $50,000. Why Robert had never said a word about making such a change? Who had pushed him to do it? Digging deeper, I found something worse. A workers' compensation policy taken out 2 months before his death. One that paid in case of an accidental death at work. The language was neat and tight. The numbers crisp, payouts listed in small tiers, not nearly what Andrew had tossed around at the hospital, but enough to pique greedy interest. A fortune to some, and a temptation to anyone without a conscience. My phone buzzed again. Same number. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. This person knew too much to be a prankster. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew details only someone very close would know. The next morning, I went to our bank. "Mrs. This?" Thompson, the branch manager who'd known us for 30 years, came out from behind the counter and hugged me. "Helen, I'm so sorry. Robert was a good man." "Thank you," I said, steadying myself. "I need to see our accounts. All of them." She led me to her office and pulled statements for the last 6 months. My eyes crawled down the columns and froze. In the past 3 months, large withdrawals had been made from our savings: $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March. Money moved without a word to me. "Who authorized these?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Robert came in," she said gently. "He said he needed the cash for shop repairs. I kept the household accounts. I knew every dollar. We hadn't discussed any repairs. Robert told me everything. Always." "Do you have the signed receipts?" I asked. She brought them out. The signatures looked like his, but the handwriting was shakier than usual. Uncertain where Robert's hand had always been firm. "Did he come alone?" I asked. She considered. "He was alone a few times, but I do remember Andrew coming with him at least once or twice. Said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Robert had trouble reading without his glasses. Without his glasses, Robert never took them off during the day. The lie sat there, ugly and plain, that afternoon, poring over the receipts at my kitchen table. My phone vibrated again. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Robert he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. The pieces kept collecting the abrupt insurance increases. The withdrawals. Andrew's name near our transactions. The rushed funeral. The cold efficiency. The way he had talked about policies while his father still breathed. I could no longer pretend not to see the outline of the thing forming in front of me. But a truth this terrible needed proof solid. Undeniable. Cruel as a hammer. Go to Robert's shop. The next message read, "Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see." I hadn't stepped into the shop since the explosion. I braced myself for scorch marks. Charred walls. Twisted metal. Instead, I found the place strangely tidy, too clean for a site where a machine had supposedly blown apart. No burn patterns on the walls. No debris. Every tool in its usual spot. The welder. The compressor. The saw all intact. All humming their quiet. Ordinary silence. "Where's the machine that exploded?" I asked the empty room. In Robert's desk, I found a small notebook and a folded page in his hand. Dated 3 days before his death, Andrew insists I need more insurance. Says it's for Helen. Something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. Beneath it. Another line. Thomas brought papers to sign claims there to modernize the shop. I don't understand any of it. Why the hurry? He had suspected them. My heart cracked at the thought of Robert. Careful and suspicious. Trying to shield me and failing only because death came too soon. In the bottom drawer, an envelope sealed with my name. I opened it with shaking hands. My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. In recent months, I've seen changes in Andrew and Thomas. Too much talk about money. Insurance. Selling the house. Clara has been pressing them. Yesterday, Andrew told me I should be more careful, said at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but it felt like a threat. I love you. If anything happens, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons. The letter slid from my fingers. Robert had seen the storm I refused to see. That evening, Andrew arrived with a bottle of wine and a bright, false smile. "Mom, I've been thinking about your future," he said, pouring himself a glass without asking if I wanted one. "The insurance is already in process. It'll be $15,000. How do you know the exact amount?" I asked. Feigning innocence. He didn't blink. "I helped Dad with the paperwork. He wanted to be sure you had enough to be comfortable." A lie. Robert had never wanted to raise the coverage. His note said Andrew had pushed him. "And what should I do with that money?" I asked. Watching his eyes, they lit with a quick, greedy sparkle. "You could buy a smaller place, or better yet, move into a good retirement community with medical care. Thomas and I can manage your money, so it goes further. At your age, it's easy to get scammed. We know investments. We could triple it in a few years. Triple it or make it vanish into their own pockets. Let me think," I said softly. "Of course." Clara chimed in with her practiced sweetness. "But not too long. For your own good." After they left, I sat shaking at the kitchen table. Fury and fear vibrating under my skin. My own sons had not only led their father to death, now they were circling me as well. That night, a longer message arrived. "Tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the report on Robert's accident. There are contradictions you need to know." The next morning, I went to the Willow Falls station. Sergeant Daniel O'Connell, who had known Robert for years, met me with a puzzled frown. "The report on my husband's accident?" I asked. "What accident?" "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully. "From his shop. The machine that exploded." He searched his system, then shook his head. "We don't have any report of an explosion at Robert's shop. In fact, we don't have any work accident report for him at all." The floor moved under me. But my son said, "That's why the hospital your husband arrived at Riverside Medical Center on Tuesday morning," he said, reading from a paper, but not from a work accident. The medical notes indicate he was unconscious with symptoms of poisoning. Poisoning, the word barely left my lips. They found methanol in his blood, enough to cause blindness, brain damage, and eventually death. The hospital should have informed you. It hadn't been an explosion. It hadn't been an accident. Someone had poisoned my husband. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked. Voice breaking. The immediate family who signed the hospital papers requested confidentiality to avoid unnecessary speculation. He said gently. They said you were too fragile for the technical details. Immediate family. Andrew and Thomas. Mrs. Carter. The sergeant added, leaning forward. If you have reason to suspect your husband was harmed, we can open a formal investigation. I had more than suspicions. I had the truth forming like a storm cloud over my life. That afternoon, Thomas arrived with a bouquet and the same polished smile as his brother. How are you? Mom, you look tired. I'm fine. I lied, studying every twitch of his mouth, every shift of his eyes. I'm thinking about the future. That's good, he said smoothly. Andrew and I think you should sell the house soon. While the market's hot. Why the rush? Well, old houses lose value. And you need liquidity. Funeral expenses, medical bills, more lies. The funeral had been cheap, insultingly so, and hospital insurance had covered what remained. Thomas, I said, meeting his eyes. You knew your father didn't die from a work accident. For a fraction of a second, panic flickered across his face, then vanished. What are you talking about? Mom, I went to the police station. There's no report of an explosion at Dad's shop. This time the panic was harder to hide. He stood abruptly, knocking coffee across the table. You shouldn't be doing things like that, he said. Voice tight. They'll confuse you. Grief does that. Grief is confusing, or you've been lying to me. He left quickly, stepping onto the porch to make a phone call in a tone so urgent it chilled me. That night, another message. They're coming together tomorrow. They'll try to convince you you're imagining things. Don't believe them. And don't eat or drink anything they bring. The warning came true to the minute. The next day, Andrew and Thomas arrived together, Clara at their heels. All three wearing expressions of exaggerated concern. Thomas carried a bag of pastries from the downtown bakery. Andrew set a paper tray of coffees on my table. Mom, we're worried about you. Andrew began in that syrupy voice people use on children. The neighbors say you've been acting strange. Nancy says you're not eating. Nancy had said no such thing. Another neat lie, laid like a trap. Clara brought your favorite pastries, Thomas added, opening the bag. And we got that special coffee you love. I remembered the message. Don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink. Robert had died of methanol poisoning slipped into a drink. A cup of coffee. A morning routine. I stepped back. Thank you, I said evenly. But I already ate. But, Mom, Clara insisted with a brittle smile. You have to eat properly. You've lost so much weight since Robert passed. I'm fine, I said, keeping my voice steady. Andrew and Thomas exchanged a look, the same unreadable glance they'd shared in the hospital when the doctor spoke of Robert's prognosis. Mom, Andrew said, moving closer. We need to talk. Thomas and I have consulted some doctors about your recent behavior. My behavior, yes, the strange questions. The police visit. Your obsession with irrelevant details about Dad. It's normal after a great loss. But if it isn't treated, it can be dangerous. Thomas added gravely. We spoke to Dr. Whitmore. He let the name hang in the air like a verdict. Dr. Whitmore says it's common. Andrew began softly. For older people to develop paranoia after losing a partner, especially women your age. Paranoia. They were calling me crazy now, using the same word they had whispered about their father before he fell ill. I'm not paranoid, I said, forcing my voice to steady. I'm asking the questions I should have asked from the beginning. What questions? Andrew challenged, his smile thinning. Why is there no police report for your father's so-called accident? Why is the shop spotless if there was an explosion? And why did you withdraw $5,000 from our account without telling me? The room fell silent. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the three of them, Andrew, Thomas, and Clara, exchanged quick, nervous glances. Mom, Thomas said at last, those things have simple explanations. Dad took out that money for repairs. He wanted to surprise you. A surprise, yes. Andrew lied smoothly. He hired workers to fix the roof and repaint the walls. He wanted it ready for your birthday. If that were true, where were the workers? Where were the materials? Why had no one in town seen a single bucket of paint, and about the police report? Andrew went on, his confidence returning. Not all work accidents require one, especially on private property. More lies. Sergeant O'Connell had been clear any accident causing serious injury required an official record. Mom, Clara said, her voice dripping syrup, we just want to take care of you. That's why we think it's best for you to move somewhere with medical supervision. A home. Andrew corrected. A specialized care home for people dealing with complicated grief. They have psychologists, nurses, activities, everything you need. And in the meantime, Thomas added, we'll handle selling the house, managing the insurance, all those complicated things you shouldn't have to worry about right now. There it was. The plan in full view: declare me mentally unfit, lock me away, and strip me of everything Robert and I had built. First, they had murdered my husband. Now they meant to finish what they'd started. And what if I refuse? I asked quietly. Why would you refuse? Andrew's smile chilled me. We only want what's best for you. Because this is my house, I said, rising from my chair. This is where I built my life with your father. This is where I raised you. Mom, Thomas sighed. Fining, patience. You can't live in the past forever. Dad's gone. You need to move on. I have accepted his death, I answered. But I will not surrender my home or my dignity. Their masks of concern cracked. Andrew's smile hardened. All right. If you won't listen to reason, we'll take more drastic steps. What steps? We can start the legal process to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have witnesses to your erratic behavior and testimony from doctors confirming senile paranoia. Doctors? What doctors? Doctors? Whitmore already signed a preliminary report. Thomas said, based on our description of your actions, he recommends specialized care. A doctor who had never met me had signed a report labeling me insane, paid for, no doubt, by my sons. So you can cooperate voluntarily, Andrew concluded. Or we can make it legal. Either way, you'll get the help you need. A threat. Pure and simple. If I didn't yield, they'd use the courts to steal my freedom. I need time to think, I said, buying precious hours. Of course, Clara replied with her sugar-coated malice. But not too long for your own good. When they left, I sat in my kitchen trembling with rage. My own sons, the blood of my blood, had murdered their father and were plotting to destroy me too. That night my phone buzzed again. The message longer than usual. Helen, this is Stephen Callahan. Robert hired me 3 weeks before he died. He suspected Andrew and Thomas. They poisoned him with methanol in his morning coffee. I have audio proof. Meet me tomorrow. 3 p.m. at the corner cafe. Back table. At last I knew who had been sending the messages and that the truth was finally within reach. But time was short. My sons had shown their hand. If I didn't act, they'd have me locked away while they spent the money that had cost Robert his life. The war had begun, and though I was a 66-year-old widow, I had something they lacked: the truth. And truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to rise. That night, for the first time since Robert's death, I smiled. My husband's caution, his instinct, his decision to hire a private investigator would bring justice. My sons had underestimated their mother. The next day dawned cold and bright. I dressed carefully in my deep purple dress, the one I wore for important moments. At 2:30 p.m., I walked toward the corner cafe. Every step steady, though. My hands trembled inside my gloves. Every passerby looked like a spy. The paranoia they accused me of was beginning to feel like common sense. The cafe buzzed softly with afternoon chatter. I moved to the back table as instructed and ordered chamomile tea. Exactly at 3, a tall man in his 50s appeared. Silver hair, sharp eyes, a kind but serious face. Mrs. Carter, he asked in a low voice. I nodded. I'm Stephen Callahan. I'm sorry for your loss. Robert was a good man. He set a brown folder on the table. Before I show you what I have, you should know this will be painful. Are you ready? I've been ready since your first message, I said. He opened the folder, produced a small recorder, and pressed play. Robert's voice filled the air, steady, familiar, alive. Stephen, if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Andrew and Thomas keep pushing me to raise my life insurance coverage. Yesterday, Andrew brought forms he said would protect Helen, but they include clauses that benefit them directly. My throat tightened. For a moment, hearing him was like having him back. Henry Thomas has been asking about my breakfast. What time I leave for work? Whether Helen joins me? Says it's concern. But it feels wrong. Stephen paused the recording. That was 3 weeks before his death, he said. There's more. He played another track, Andrew's voice. Cold and unmistakable. No, we can't wait any longer. The old man's getting suspicious. I already have the methanol, looks like a heart attack or stroke. Mom won't be a problem. After he's gone, she'll be too broken to fight us. Tears slid down my face. My son's voice, my own child, speaking of murder as calmly as business. There's one more, Stephen said softly. From the day before Robert died. Now it was Thomas. Speaking on the phone, everything's ready. Tomorrow, Andrew's putting the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it's a vitamin drink. The symptoms, dizziness, blindness, coma. The doctors will think stroke. By the time they realize, it'll be too late. My world collapsed anew. How did you get this? I whispered. Robert asked me to plant small recorders in your house. Stephen explained gently. He didn't know exactly what to fear, only that something was coming. He slid several photographs across the table, Andrew, leaving a hardware store with a small bottle in his hand. Methanol, Stephen said. Bought 5 days before Robert's death. Cash. Fake name. But I got him on video. Then came bank statements and ledgers. Your son's finances. Andrew owes $70,000 to a private lender in St. Louis. Thomas has $40,000 in gambling debt. They were desperate. Everything clicked into place. Not just greed ruin. They had turned their father into money. Why didn't you go to the police earlier? I asked. They bribed the attending doctor, Stephen said. He falsified the death certificate, heart failure from a work accident. Without that correction, my recordings weren't enough. But now, I said, gripping the folder, we have everything. Exactly. And there's one more thing. My heart stalled. What, they were planning to kill you too? He played the final recording. Andrew, once we get Dad's money. We can't risk Mom getting ideas. Thomas, how? Andrew, same as Dad. But this time we make it look like suicide, a widow who can't live without him. No one will question it. We're her only heirs. 200,000 total. I was shaking uncontrollably. My sons, the boys I had cradled, fed, defended, were plotting to end my life for money. Mrs. Carter, Stephen said gently. I know this is unbearable, but we have enough for arrest warrants. Your husband's foresight will bring them down. What do we do now? I asked, wiping my tears. First, go to the police tonight. Sergeant O'Connell is honest. Second, hurry. They're meeting a judge tomorrow at 10 to have you declared incompetent. I rose from the table with a calm, fiercer than anger. Then we act tonight. Stephen nodded. But there's one last thing. He drew a photograph of Robert leaving a city clinic 3 days before he died. He underwent a full physical. Results: perfect health, no heart disease, no hypertension. This proves the poisoning. That was the final proof. Robert had been murdered by our sons. Stephen, I said, taking his hand, thank you for keeping your promise. Let's finish what he started. That night we went straight to the Willow Falls police station. Sergeant O'Connell was on duty. It was 8 o'clock. The corridor's quiet. Sergeant, I said firmly, placing the folder before him. I need to file a formal complaint for the murder of my husband, Robert Carter. He blinked in shock. Murder, Mrs. Carter? The certificate says heart complications after an accident. It's false, I replied. My husband was poisoned by our sons. For 2 hours we laid out everything, the recordings, The photographs of methanol, the bank documents, Robert's medical results, and finally the confession tapes. Sergeant O'Connell listened, his face hardening with every minute. When the last tape ended, he leaned back, stunned. "This is monstrous," he said quietly. "Are you certain you want to go through with this once we arrest them? There's no turning back." "Sergeant," I said, standing tall. "They murdered my husband for money and planned to murder me next. They're no longer my sons. They're criminals. We'll need to exhume the body to confirm methanol," he said carefully. "Do whatever you must." He phoned the district attorney. Even at that hour, the DA came himself. After reviewing the evidence, he authorized arrest warrants for Andrew and Thomas. "We'll move at dawn," the DA said. "We need to strike before they destroy anything." Stephen walked me home. "Will you be all right alone?" he asked. "I'll be fine," I told him. "I'm done being afraid. I have justice now." I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by photographs of Robert, the way he smiled when he looked at me, the way he always smelled of cedar and soap. For the first time since his death, the ache in my chest mixed with a quiet satisfaction. Justice was coming. At 6 a.m., the phone rang. "Andrew." "Mom, you need to come to Thomas's house right away. Something terrible's happened." "What happened?" I asked, forcing my voice to tremble. "I'll explain when you get here. Please. Hurry." "A trap." "Of course. But I also knew police units were already mobilizing. I'm on my way." I lied. Instead of leaving, I waited by the window. At 7:30, police cruisers sped down the street, splitting off toward my son's homes. My phone rang again and again, first Andrew, then Thomas, voices rising with panic. I let them ring. At 9 sharp, Sergeant O'Connell knocked on my door. "Mrs. Carter," he said. "They're in custody charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder." My knees trembled, not with fear this time, but with relief. How did they react? Andrew denied everything until we played the tapes. Then he broke down. Thomas tried to flee out a window. We caught him 6 blocks away. That afternoon, Clara appeared at my doorstep, sobbing. Gone was the arrogance. She was a picture of hysteria. "Mrs. Carter, please," she begged. "Drop the charges against Andrew. He isn't evil, he just made mistakes." I looked at her. This woman who had stood by while greed turned love into murder? And I felt nothing but pity. She kept saying he wasn't bad. Clara sobbed on my porch, mascara streaking her veil. He was just desperate because of his debts. It's my fault, too. I pushed him to find money. I looked at her without a shred of softness. "Clara, your husband poisoned Robert. He was planning to murder me as well. There is no excuse for that, none. But we're family," she cried. "Think what this will do to the family." "The family died," I said coldly. "The day you all decided Robert's life could be traded for cash. Please leave my house." 3 days later, the medical examiner completed the exhumation. The lab report confirmed exactly what Stephen had uncovered: lethal levels of methanol in Robert's blood, enough to explain the confusion, the blindness, the coma, and the death that followed. The case ripped through Willow Falls like a summer storm. People who had known my sons since Little League stood on their porches shaking their heads. No one could believe 2 grown men had murdered the father who raised them. The local paper called it the cruelest crime of the decade. In the weeks that followed, more truth surfaced. Andrew really did owe $7,000 to illegal lenders who had begun threatening him. Thomas had lost $5, 0 inches, underground gambling rooms, and was facing threats of his own. They had looked at Robert's insurance as their lifeline. Their greed had pushed them to hike the policies so aggressively that even Robert, gentle as he was, grew suspicious. We also learned that the attending physician who falsified the death certificate had taken $5, 0 inches cash from Andrew. He, too, was arrested, obstruction of justice and falsifying official documents. Later, Stephen walked me through everything he and Robert had planned. "Your husband was smarter than his sons gave him credit for. he said. He knew something bad was coming. He just couldn't see the shape of it yet. He hired me not only to investigate Andrew and Thomas, but to protect you if anything happened to him. Did he know they meant to kill him, I asked. Not precisely, Stephen said, but he knew he was in danger. That's why we placed the recorders. That's why we documented everything. He wanted to be sure that if he couldn't speak, the truth still would, even in his final days. My husband was protecting me. He had read our son's betrayal before I could bear to look at it. The trial was set for 2 months later. Andrew and Thomas were both charged with first-degree murder, which in our state carries 25 years to life. When the day arrived, the courthouse overflowed. Reporters from the regional papers crowded the aisles. Neighbors, men from the shop, even people I barely knew came to witness justice for Robert Carter. I wore my best black dress, the one I had worn on our wedding day long ago, which now meant mourning and dignity. Stephen sat beside me, steady as a lighthouse. When my sons entered in orange jumpsuits and shackles, my heart splintered one last time. I felt no pity, only a deeper grief for the moral death they chose long before they murdered their father. The prosecutor laid out the case with calm precision, one by one. The recordings played. Each time Andrew's or Thomas's voice filled the courtroom plotting dosages, predicting symptoms, discussing money. A hush fell so complete you could hear the old clock on the back wall. When the recording played in which they discussed killing me too, an older woman in the gallery stood up weeping and left. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor said, this is not ordinary family greed. This is cold, calculated premeditation. 2 men decided to murder the father who raised them because they needed money to cover gambling losses and reckless loans. The defense tried to build a raft from desperation and bad influences, but it sank under the weight of evidence. The recordings did not lie. The bank statements did not lie. The toxicology report did not lie. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand on trembling legs. But my mind was clear. I had waited months for this. Mrs. Carter. The prosecutor asked gently, what was your relationship with your sons before your husband's murder? I thought it was good, I said, looking directly at Andrew and Thomas. I raised them with love. Their father worked from sunup to sundown to give them the best we could. I never imagined that love and sacrifice would become the reason for his murder. Did you ever suspect they might harm your husband? No, I said. That is the most painful truth. I trusted them completely. When they told me there was an accident at the shop, I believed them. When they rushed the funeral, I thought it was grief. I did not know they were covering a crime. Andrew dropped his head. Thomas stared straight at me, eyes bright with a heat that might have been hatred or shame. Too late for tears. Too late for regret. The most searing moment came when the prosecutor played the full recording of the conversation about my own murder. Andrew, once we have Dad's insurance, we need to get rid of Mom. 2. We can't risk her getting suspicious. A murmur of horror moved through the room like wind in tall grass. How did you feel when you first heard that the prosecutor asked? I understood then, I said, my voice steady at last, that I had lost my sons long before I lost my husband, the babies I nursed. The boys I comforted through nightmares, those children were gone. In their place stood 2 strangers who would do anything for money. Stephen testified next, detailing how Robert had hired him, the evidence he gathered, and how every piece from methanol purchase to forged certificate fit together. The medical examiner confirmed the methanol levels and explained, in plain terms, how that poison kills slowly and convincingly, masquerading as stroke. After 3 days, the lawyers made their final arguments. The prosecutor's closing was a hammer wrapped in silk. Andrew and Thomas Carter are not victims of circumstance, he said. They are predators who saw their own parents as obstacles to be eliminated. They planned, executed, and concealed Robert's murder and planned to do the same to Helen. They do not deserve your sympathy. They deserve judgment. The jury deliberated 6 hours. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. I could hear my own heart. In the matter of the state versing, Andrew Carter and Thomas Carter. The foreperson read, on the charge of first-degree murder of Robert Carter, we find the defendants guilty A wave of whispers and gasps swept the room. On the charge of conspiracy to commit the murder of Helen Carter, we find the defendants guilty. The judge did not wait. Andrew Carter and Thomas Carter. For the premeditated murder of your father and conspiracy to murder your mother. I sentence you to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 30 years. The weight lifted off my shoulders so suddenly I swayed. Justice. At last. Justice for Robert. Afterward, people embraced me in the hallway. Nancy cried. Not from sorrow, but relief. Now he can rest. She whispered. Robert can rest. That night, a home felt different. It was no longer only a place of pain and betrayal, it was our house again, where love had once lived and, in a quieter way, still did. A week later, Stephen came by. How do you feel? He asked. At peace, I said truthfully. For the first time since he died, I sleep. I know Robert is resting because the truth did not die with him. And the money, he asked gently. Insurance. Savings. I donated his life insurance to a fund for families harmed by crimes like ours. I said, that money was blood-stained. I could never spend it. My own savings will suffice. 6 months later, a letter came from the penitentiary. It was from Andrew. Mom, I don't deserve forgiveness. The debts. The panic. The hunger for money, they blinded us. We lost our souls. Thomas and I destroyed the most loving family for $5,000 we never even enjoyed. Tomorrow, I will end my life. Tell Dad we're sorry. I called the prison. But I was too late. Andrew was found hanging in his cell the next morning. When Thomas heard, his mind broke. They moved him to the psychiatric ward after he tried to take his own life. He has been there ever since. Guarded and medicated. Haunted, so they say, by visions of Robert standing at the foot of his bed. 2 years after the trial, I live quietly in our small house. I turned Robert's shop into a garden, a riot of red roses, white carnations, and sunflowers that track the light like faithful sentries. Every Sunday, I cut fresh flowers and carry them to the cemetery. Sometimes neighbors ask if I miss my sons. The answer is complicated. I miss the children they once were. But those boys died long before Robert did. The men who took their place were strangers who shared my blood, not my heart. I have learned that real family is measured by love, loyalty, and respect, not by DNA. Robert was my true family for 42 years. The friends who stood with me through the trial, Stephen, Nancy, the men from the shop are my family now. Justice did not bring Robert back, but it gave me peace. On quiet evenings, when I sit on the porch with my coffee, I sometimes feel him near, steady as ever. Proud that I did the hard thing because it was right. 5 years have passed since the message that changed everything buzzed in my hand at his grave. I'm 71 now, my hair has gone snow white with the storms I've weathered. But my eyes, Nancy says, are brighter. The house we built is still my refuge. I painted the walls a soft yellow, Robert's favorite, and the garden spills through his old workshop like sunlight. Stephen Callahan became more than the investigator who brought us justice. He is my chosen family. Every Wednesday afternoon he visits. We drink coffee on the porch and he tells me about his cases. Sometimes he asks if I regret turning in my own sons, if it would have been easier to let the lie stand. Never. I always say, truth hurts, but lies kill the soul. The fund I founded with Robert's policy grew into something larger, the Robert Carter Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes. We help dozens of families each year, psychologists, attorneys, investigators, all to ensure no one suffers in silence the way I almost did. 6 months ago, a woman of about 40 came to see me, Eleanor. She suspected her brother had killed their mother for the inheritance. The story was painfully familiar: greedy relatives, pressure to sell property, strange behavior after the funeral. We gave her an investigator, legal support, and counseling. 3 months later, her brother was convicted of murder. She hugged me at the courthouse steps, tears bright as rain. Mrs. Carter, you saved my life, she said. If you hadn't had the courage to report your sons, I never would have found courage to report mine. Moments like that remind me the pain was not wasted. Thomas still writes sometimes letters full of jagged apologies and pleas for forgiveness. At first, I read them looking for a trace of the boy I loved. Eventually, I realized the letters only reopened wounds that had finally begun to heal. I keep them in a shoebox now, unopened. Perhaps one day I'll read them. Perhaps not. Peace is also a duty. Clara left town after the sentencing. Someone said she changed her name in the city. I don't blame her. Living under the name of a murderer is a heavy burden. I sometimes wonder if she knew everything. If silence made her an accomplice. Those questions belong to the past. I have learned to live in the present. Willow Falls has not forgotten. The Carter's case became a cautionary tale. A story parents tell their children about greed and betrayal. Some call me a hero, others call me a cruel woman who sent her sons to prison. I don't concern myself with either. I know what is true. And truth has given me rest. At my last checkup, the doctor said my health is strong for my age. Bodies heal when hearts find peace. He told me. I think he's right. On Sundays, I walk the familiar path to the cemetery with a small bouquet from my garden. Robert's headstone bears the words I chose after the verdict: Robert Carter, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. His love was stronger than his death. I tell him about the foundation, the families we've helped, the thank you notes stacked on my kitchen table. Sometimes the breeze lifts through the maples, and I feel his approval in the cool of it. Do you know what's strangest? My love, I said at his grave last week. I don't feel pain when I think of Andrew and Thomas anymore. I feel pity. They had all the love in the world and chose hate. They had a family that adored them and chose betrayal. They could have been honorable men, like you, and chose to be murderers. A reporter came recently to interview me for a documentary about family crimes. She asked what I'd say to anyone living through something similar. Family is not an excuse for crime. I told her, love is not blind. Love with boundaries is love that protects. If someone who claims to love you is willing to harm you for money or convenience, that is not love. And it is never, ever too late to seek justice. On the 5th anniversary of Robert's death, we held a memorial service. More than 200 people came, neighbors, volunteers, families the foundation has helped, and local officials. Stephen gave the most beautiful speech. Robert Carter died because of his son's greed. He said, but his legacy lives in every family that finds justice because his wife had courage. Evil tried to end his story. Good turned it into hope. At night I sometimes take out the old photographs, 2 little boys in grass-stained jeans. Robert kneeling between them. My arms around all 3. I allow myself to cry for the children they were, before greed hollowed them out. I don't cry for the men they became. The men chose. My story grew larger than my private sorrow. It became a reminder that truth is stronger than lies. That love, real love, is stronger than betrayal. And that doing the right thing is possible at any age. A 66-year-old widow dragged the truth into daylight. And light did what it always does. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Stephen will come for coffee. And I'll bake his favorite pastry. We'll sit on the porch and read the latest thank you letters. Afterward, we'll pull on our gloves and kneel in the soil, tucking new seedlings into the earth for spring. Life goes on simpler, cleaner, more honest. I have learned that true family isn't blood. It's shared values, mutual respect, and a love that never turns into harm. Robert, wherever you are, I kept the promise I made at your grave that terrible day. I found the truth. I sought justice. And I turned our pain into hope for others. Your death was not in vain. My love,